potentially darker future for the US dollar isn't fantasy. In fact, the US military and NATO are taking the notion very seriously.
I was attending this luncheon with the Chief of Defense Staff at the time, General Walton Tinchuk, had invited me to accompany him down there. He was being named to their Hall of Fame at the U.S. Army War College. So they had a luncheon in his honor, and a number of guests were there, some from the college itself, and others were, one was a Canadian exchange officer who was down there taking the course himself, and he sought me out.
Scott Taylor is an award-winning war correspondent and editor-in-chief of Esprit de Corps, Canada's most popular military magazine.
One of the things they were studying, which I found quite interesting, was what would happen if indeed, as in 2008, I mean, we came close to the brink in terms of financial collapse, what would happen to the American military abroad? What would they do if the American dollar suddenly became worthless? And no one had asked that question before. Americans basically have the carrot and stick approach. I mean, they've got the big military, but they also have the lure of the big American dollar. It's been there. I mean, it's obviously a little bit tarnished now that there's been a few hiccups along the way, and people are looking a little bit more leery at the American dollar, knowing it's not shored up with any gold reserves. That said, I mean, people still, in a lot of developing countries, still look for that. If they know that that's disappeared, if the carrot disappears and the stick is weak, that empire is going to come down in a hurry.
The challenge of the Chinese Communist Party and the threat that it poses to the United States and our allies is of critical importance to us right now.
I think in the long term, in terms of American security policy, China is going to be a much more powerful country than Russia.
There's no country that presents a broader, more comprehensive threat to America's innovation, to our economic security, and to our democratic ideas than China does.
I believe we've got to live in reality.
Communist China, it wants to control the entire world, including Americans.
Let's be clear, the Chinese Communist Party is a Marxist-Leninist organization. The party General Secretary Xi Jinping sees himself as Joseph Stalin's successor.
China's a longer-term threat, and we need to be very clear-eyed about what they are and what they aren't.
They're not our partner. They're never going to be our partner under the existing leadership team.
Under President Xi's rule, the Chinese Communist Party is heading even faster and further in the wrong direction. More internal repression, more predatory economic practices, more heavy-handedness, and most concerning for me, a more aggressive military posture.
For China, success is a zero-sum game.
China is going to eat our lunch? Come on, man. I mean, they're not bad folks, but guess what? They're not they're competition for us.
I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun, and the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap, and I've loved kids jumping on my lap, and I've loved kids jumping on my lap, and I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
On the surface, that's a really puzzling thing to say. Joe Biden's saying China is not really a threat. China is America's chief rival on the global stage, and nobody should know that better than Joe Biden. I mean, during the Obama-Biden administration, they actually recalibrated foreign policy to contain China. It was called the pivot. China has never loomed larger in our lives. Think about it. The economy, trade, espionage, now COVID-19. China has said openly that they want to supplant us as the world's superpower. But Joe Biden talks about China differently.
China is not our enemy. Not a problem. What are we worried about? Come on, man.
He doesn't see them as a threat.
And I believe then what I believe now, that a rising China is a positive development.
He welcomes their rise as a global power. Why exactly? Perhaps it's personal. Perhaps it's about his family. Perhaps it's about money.
All right, guys, like I was saying, the impact of this will be, it'll hurt way more, and it'll cause a domino effect to where other countries will start seeing that the dollar will be declining. Now, what I meant to say when I meant that countries will start selling their U.S. treasuries, their assets, so things like that. Now, if we look at gold here, let's look at gold real quick. Let's look at the 10-year gold. Right now, it's almost hitting 1,800. Okay, the high was 2011, almost 2,000. Okay, so why is it being held? Manipulation of the central banks. I'm going to show you how this is happening. The central banks have been manipulating and spoofing the precious metals for a good long time now. And first it was speculative. A lot of the people thought that this was happening, but it was actually confirmed by courts, because the banks were now being last year and a couple months ago have been sent to court and have arrangements to make for these. They're actually getting fined. The banks are getting
spoofing. So let's start off by explaining what this practice is.
Yeah, so spoofing is kind of typically kind of flooding derivatives markets with orders that traders actually don't intend to execute in order to kind of trick other market participants to kind of move the price in a certain direction that they want them to. Think of it like trying to sell a hamburger by flooding the front of your restaurant with a bunch of people, and as soon as someone buys it, everybody disappears.
So what were the losses from all of this then?
So the losses in the marketplace, the government says is $300 million to other market participants over 8 years.
Right, so part of the settlement, Tom, means that the bank needs to continue to cooperate with ongoing investigations. So does that mean there's more to come? And, what sort of scale are we talking about here?
Yeah, sure. Yes. So we kind of got a little window into sort of how big a case this might be about a year ago when they brought racketeering charges against about 4 JP Morgan precious metals traders. And sort of today, we'll get a real sort of look at just actually how extensive the government's case was, because it not only involved this precious metals desk, but also their treasuries desk. And as you said, it's, we know 15 traders accused of this misconduct over a significant period of time. And so there's cases continuing against the individuals at the moment.
So how did the U.S. government figure out this was going on from the get-go?
Yeah, sure. Really, they, for the first time, they're really using data, their own sort of data from the traders to make the case. So anytime these traders are putting in an order, they use their personal ID on the exchange that they're trading on. And what the government did was they got their hands on all that trading data and kind of looked for, the red flags, and kind of came up with a list of traders to look at. And from there, they started, issuing subpoenas and knocking on the doors of traders' homes.
Tell me, will there be compensation for the victims?
Yeah, so this $300 million, the Justice Department is part of their resolution is collecting that from the bank. They're going to set it aside in some sort of crime victims fund. So, at some point, I guess they'll try and provide some type of notification to market participants that they could probably file something in an attempt to, be compensated for their losses.
And why is the price fixing of gold and silver and precious metals important by all of the major banks, including the same very bank, UBS, that funneled the money through the Chinese bank joint venture through Dominion, for the elections? Why are they fixated on manipulating gold and silver and precious metals? Why? Well, guess what? hyperinflation. They don't want the market sentiment to change. They want people to keep going on stocks, to keep bringing those corporate profits up. And middle America invests in stocks, corporate stocks. Meanwhile, you're not investing in hard assets like precious metals, okay, and land, and guns, and you're getting suckered into the casino market, into the inflation market, and all of this hasn't hit. All this money that's been printed is gonna devalue the dollar time, and then you have the cryptos also involved, and you have the China factor as well. That's why all of this is important, because if gold was the real price of $4,000 or $5,000, people would be freaking out right now, and the prices and the sentiment of the market and everything would change, and the hyperinflation was set in realistic terms. The psychological factor of the market would be then shown. This is serious stuff, guys. You better fucking take it seriously. And I'm sorry, I don't curse in my own channel, but you better take it seriously. This is life and death. And manipulation by in the financial markets, by the banks, they can do anything they want. Okay? But this is what happens in the broken republic, in the broken system. Alright, guys? Capitalism, this is not real capitalism. This is literally corporatism, financial manipulation through the central bank, financial communism. It's communism. You're using the money in the private bank. It's a private bank. It's not nationalized bank. So guys, get gold and silver. Please save yourself. Ridiculous. If compared to the 2008 QE, quantitative easing, the printing bailouts that happened with the banks in 2008, it's different in a bigger manner, because this time you have multiple. Let me show you now. Compared to the COVID stimuluses, because the COVID stimulus visualized, and this is articles by USA Today, it shows you in depth how big it is in terms of the money. And again, the link is right there if you want to look at it for yourselves, guys. But the picture I wanted to show you for this was published March 17, 2021, and it shows you the amount that we've spent in a little time span. So for example, in March and April, which was at the midst of the pandemic, 2.2 trillion stimulus that was printed. Then another 950 in December, and March that we just had 1.9 trillion. Now this is immense amount of money that is being circulated and printed at interest by the Federal Reserve. And I wanted to show you that visual because it shows you the monumental things that are happening, because not even in 2008 this happened. Not even in 2008. Now, do you understand what I'm saying? Not even in 2008 this type of monumental printing and fiat money was going around. And it was right before 2008 when everything happened. There is a cycle. It's happening again, and this time it's a bigger one. It's a bigger bubble that's going to happen in the stock market. You better get out right now, guys. You better get out right now, because it's being pushed with all this easy money that's going out, and it's not good money. A lot of things that are going to impact this. China, 1.2 trillion weapon that could be used in the trade war with the U.S. China holds 1.17 trillion in U.S. government debt. This was printed in 2008. Economists and investors worry if there's a trade war that China could reduce its U.S. debt holding and a political weapon against the administrations back when Trump was doing the tariffs. If that happens, the dollar could fall and other countries could follow suit and sell their holdings. The domino effect that I was telling you guys. Okay, this is not conspiracy. This is CNBC articles. This is timelines of economics and research and journalists showing you this. So this is my job here in Odyssey Media, is to show you the timeline of all this research so you can be informed and you can understand what's happening. I won't go on to read you the rest of the article. It goes more into depth, but yeah, it's been known for a long time that China holds the bigger debt, but now we're getting to a point where China is buying debt from other countries, buying U.S. debt that other countries have in their yuan, okay? Because they want to have all of the U.S. debt. Why? Because they need it for one goal, and that's to manipulate and potentially even destroy the dollar. So we go on further to another one here. By Forbes. This was 2019, so I'm giving you the time lapse. Are U.S. treasuries an assassin's mace or China's trump card, weaponizing treasuries in a trade war? Leon Lebrecki. I'm passionate about pensions, recessions, IRAs, and retirement. So he's a great financial analyst to look at. Trade war maneuvers. Who will come out on top? Wars are fought in unusual ways. Sometimes they are fought with symmetrical armies facing off in the battlefield, exchanging volleys of ammunition, and other times they are fought in a guerrilla warfare with stealth and asymmetrical battle. Michael Pillsbury, in a book of 100-Year Marathon, suggests that China's hawks leadership talks about developing an assassin's mace to supplant the United States. The assassin's mace has its root in ancient Chinese folklore, which recounts how hero-wielding such a weapon could overcome a powerful adversary. The Xiao Jian was a hidden club with a hidden assassins. It decapitated his enemy suddenly and totally instead of fighting him in a conventional way. The term is rooted in the Chinese culture and its equivalent of silver bullet or a trump card, pun intended. So, it was eventually set to happen because China had already usurped so much of the industry of the United States that the United States had no choice but to start fighting back. But in fighting back, it would also start the domino effect of China doing their maneuverings to try and finish off the dollar before it could gather up its strength. But now with the new administration, it doesn't have that chance. Why? Again, the trillion-dollar bailouts that are way bigger than the bank bailouts in 2008 at interest, while there's already lockdowns and other bubbles and the stock market bubble. I mean, and then you have on top of that the factor of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Oh my gosh. It's so big. It's so big. We go on. In the aftermath of the Gulf War, the Chinese quickly determined that the U.S. could decimate Soviet-type fighting tactics, so the Chinese military decided to create a series of Shanxians to allow an inferior force to defeat a superior force. These assassin maces might include an anti-satellite laser system, high-tech submarines for sound-like capability, parasitic microsatellites, a cyber warfare methods. What if there was an economic or political assassin mace, he asks. So he's getting now into saying, how could they use this? Apologize for the sun there. What if China decided to wage part of the trade war with an unexpected attack with or on money? Consider the trade conflict. Initially, phase 1 is tit for tat. The president initiates tariff. China retaliates. Right. Again, that had to happen because we were losing so much money. So much money by trade. I mean, eventually, if he wasn't going to do it, another one could have. Phase 2, the president ups the tariffs and escalates the conflicts by banning businesses by doing with China. The Chinese pull out. They dump 1.2 trillion in treasuries they hold. Interest rates spike. The dollar drops. The U.S. economy goes into recession, and the next president renegotiates. China holds 1.1 trillion of U.S. Treasury securities, about 5% of the GDP. China has been selling treasuries for a low-rate environment, allows for a higher price. Sellers can control prices and supply and demand. Consider when the semiconductor market was crushed by dumping and corresponding crash in steel prices. The strategy is to take short-term pain and inflict long-term damage. The thought exercise is, what are the consequences to China, to the US, and to the global economy if China dumped a significant portion of their treasuries? And that ends the article. There is a little bit more. Why would they do it? In a tariff, neither side wins. The tariff hurt the consumer or the product. Think friction in the form of taxes. Dumping treasuries would be a financial loss, would disrupt the trade exchange. It would likely disrupt the U.S. economy. Consider that the Chinese premier occupies his position for life, because he's a dictator for life, whereas November 3rd, 2020 is a pivotal date in conflict. The Chinese would likely prefer a less hawkish trade negotiator. That's why they put in Biden. And again, this article was written before all of that, just to let you know. So they had to put their agent in there to financially secure their mace. It makes perfect sense. It would hurt them, their supply and demand, of course, we can skip that. It might weaken the dollar, of course it would. It would be, and here's the domino effect. Here's what most researchers and professionals have been saying, the domino effect. And this term is what could happen and what could bring in a disaster. If China starts dumping U.S. bonds, the price of bonds declines in other countries and holders of bonds are adversely affected. Ireland holds about $262 billion U.S. debt, roughly 78% of 2017 GDP. The UK holds $341 billion, or 13% of the GDP. Japan is the larger holder of treasuries with $1.12 trillion. The big drop in bond prices will change their holdings. Other countries might also sell, triggering a bigger crisis, a panic. A local question would be, where would they go? It seems very unlikely that sellers of U.S. bonds with positive yields would park their proceeds in negative yield bonds, and there is no parking spot for the full $6 trillion of U.S. debt held by foreign investors. So again, it would just be a domino effect. He asked, could it backfire? Clearly, an attempt to dump treasuries could backfire as well. If the price dropped and yields went up, many investors might find U.S. bonds a great bargain and compare negative yield bonds elsewhere and buy the bonds back quickly, leaving China with a capital loss and not much else to show for it. Is it starting to happen? China has been selling U.S. treasuries and decreasing its bonds significantly already throughout the years, and has actually escalated now in 2021. Bottom line, he writes, China does have the ability to weaponize its treasury holdings. It can be an economic tool or political tool. Disrupting the U.S. economy may cause a recession, or I might add to this article, a depression, or greater depression, or it may play into the president's hand. Are China treasuries an economic weapon or political trump card? We will see. And that is the finale of the article. So he has some great points, because they are realistic points. And I wanted you guys to understand those financial terms that you may hear soon, hopefully not, but I want you to be prepared. So we go on to another one. The manipulation of JP Morgan Chase settles lawsuits that accuse firms of spoofing precious metals market trades. JP Morgan settled for an undisclosed amount of lawsuit accused the firm of spoofing trades in precious metals market. The suit, hedge fund manager Daniel Shack of two commodity traders accused JP Morgan Chase of manipulating silver future markets, costing plaintiffs $30 million in losses. The bank also nearing settlement $920 million to resolve government investigation to similar alleged conduct in precious metals and treasury future markets. So not only are the banks manipulating the price of gold and silver, but they're also diving into the futures market. CNBC has learned. This has been happening. This was supposed to have been banned by the part of the Dodd-Frank financial reform law after the 2008 financial, but federal prosecutors have cracked down on suspected spoofing, issuing fines and criminal charges in a number of cases. So it would explain why the price of gold, and if we go back to the gold chart, is being suppressed. Okay, because if we were to see the actual price of gold 2 or 3 or 4,000 or higher, I mean, the markets would go ballistic because they would see the hyperinflation happening, or it could be higher. That's why the central bank. And I was reading other articles too, that it's not just one bank; it's multiple banks that are doing this. So at the same time, you have Russia National Wealth Fund turning to gold, dumping dollars, same as China. It's gonna all culminate, guys, and you have to find out the reality of what money is, the reality of how to truly take and diversify yourself. But I'm afraid that once this happens, oh geez, it's better now to think ahead, because that domino effect will come. So guys, I'm going to continue to give you more insight, and thanks again for watching.
Potential dollar crash when you could argue it's been fading here for a couple weeks now.
Well, look, I think the U.S. economy has been afflicted with some significant macro imbalances for a long time, namely a very low domestic savings rate and a chronic current account deficit. But these problems are going to go from bad to worse as we blow out the fiscal deficit in the years ahead. The national savings rate, adjusted for depreciation, is probably going to go deeper into negative territory than it's ever done for the United States or for any leading economy in economic history. And at the same time, America is walking away from globalization, focused more on decoupling itself from the rest of the world. I think that's a lethal combination. I think the dollar is going to do as a currency normally does, and that is provide the equilibrium between saving and international imbalances. And I think the dollar is going to fall very, very sharply.
Even the basic cause for the American Revolution. As Franklin put it in his autobiography,
the colonies would gladly have borne a little tax on tea and other matters had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created unemployment and dissatisfaction. The inability of the colonists to get the power to issue their own money permanently out of the hands of George III and the international bankers was the prime reason for the Revolutionary War.
Total worldwide debt has never been higher, and yet there's little sign of this current wave retreating anytime soon. Now, with the coronavirus outbreak being declared a pandemic, governments have announced hundreds of billions of dollars in stimulus packages that will send debt even higher. So just how worried should we be if it all comes crashing down? Global borrowing has been growing rapidly, so rapidly that many are concerned it is quickly becoming unsustainable. The Institute of International Finance estimates total worldwide debt, which is made up of borrowings from households, companies, and government, surged to a staggering $253 trillion at the end of September 2019. That's a whole lot of debt, more than 3 times the annual economic output of the entire world. It works out to roughly $32,500 of debt for each of the 7.7 billion people on the planet. What's more, the group says this figure is only going to increase. The World Bank believes the speed and scale of this debt wave is something we should all be worried about. So much so, the group has urged governments around the world to make it a primary concern.
And Constitution were signed. In the mid-1700s, pre-revolutionary America was still relatively poor. There was a severe shortage of precious metal coins to trade for goods, so the early colonists were forced to experiment with printing their own homegrown paper money. Some of these experiments were successful. Franklin was a big supporter of the colonies printing their own paper money. In 1757, Franklin was sent to London. He ended up staying for the next 18 years here, nearly until the start of the American Revolution. During this period, the American colonies began to issue their own money. Called colonial scrip, the endeavor was very successful. It provided a reliable medium of exchange, and it also helped to provide a feeling of unity between the colonies. Remember, colonial scrip was just paper money, debt-free money, printed in the public interest, and not backed by gold or silver coin. In other words, it was a totally fiat currency. One day, officials of the Bank of England asked Franklin how he would account for the newfound prosperity of the colonies. Without hesitation, he replied,
"That is simple. In the colonies, we issue our own money. It is called colonial scrip. We issue it in proper proportion to the demands of trade and industry to make the products pass easily from the producers to the consumers. In this manner, creating for ourselves our own paper money, we control its purchasing power, and we have no interest to pay to no one. Shall become indurated down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off debts and be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will become prosperous without precedent in the history of the world. The brains and wealth of all countries will go to North America. That country must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe."
We're actually going to have. I'm not really sure. I think we're coming maybe towards the end of the cycle here, because I think the money that most people have, or at least what they think is money, isn't going to be money much longer. And so I'm not really sure how many Americans are going to have any wealth that they're looking to invest. I think most Americans are going to be struggling to survive, let alone trying to figure out where to invest money that has practically no value. The crisis that we are headed for now is really unprecedented in the world. Not that there haven't been countries that have been wiped out. I mean, we've seen hyperinflations, we've seen currencies destroyed, we've seen people impoverished. I mean, that's not new. This has been happening for a long time. What's really new is the scale. I mean, we're about to see a loss of wealth that's really unprecedented in the scale. How many people are going to lose money, or wealth rather, and how much they're going to lose. That's what's really unprecedented. And of course, it hasn't really happened in a nation as large as the United States. It hasn't happened with a nation that is issuing the world's reserve currency. So the bankruptcy of America, the impoverishment of America, a hyperinflation in America has profound implications far beyond the United States. So this is really going to be a global event, even though the bulk of the pain is going to be concentrated in America, and it's going to be experienced by Americans. And, it's not COVID. I mean, COVID-19 is not the problem. I mean, it's one of a number of problems, but it's not why we're about to go through this massive economic collapse. But it is the monetary and fiscal policy response to COVID-19, right? The government's cure is what's going to kill the economy, not the disease. And in fact, it's not just the mistakes that the government has made since COVID. It's all the mistakes that were made before COVID, right? The government just didn't start making these mistakes. The Federal Reserve didn't start QE with COVID. It started it a long time ago. This 0% interest rate policy wasn't invented because of COVID. It predated COVID. It was just resurrected on a much grander scale, which again is what I have been telling money show audiences for years. Contrary to a popular belief, everything the US government did in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis was a mistake. All the monetary policy was wrong. All the fiscal policy was wrong. As a consequence, we never actually recovered from that crisis. We simply made all of the problems that caused that crisis worse. And of course, the crisis was caused by the Fed, by the government, using the same policies that they used to respond to the crisis. Only the mistakes they made after 2008 were far bigger than the mistakes they made before 2008, and therefore the bubble that they blew up was far bigger, and the collapse, now that that bubble is popped, is going to be catastrophic, right? When the 2008 bubble popped, we had the worst crisis since the Great Depression. This crisis will be worse than the Great Depression, much worse. And unlike the Great Depression, when we were still on a gold standard, money actually gained value. So if you weren't in the stock market, if you weren't in the real estate market, you gained purchasing power. Assets got cheaper for you. The cost of living went down. Americans are not going to be that lucky this time. Everyone's going to get wiped out. People who don't have any money invested in the stock market are going to get wiped out because the dollar is going to get wiped out. We should have had a U.S. currency crisis years ago. When I wrote my book, Crash Proof, back in 2005 and 6, and it came out in 2007, and when I was going to the money shows back then, warning about the housing bubble that the Fed had inflated and about the financial crisis that was going to hit when that bubble popped, and the worst recession that we were going to get since the Depression, 10% unemployment, $1 trillion deficits, the bankruptcy of Fannie and Freddie, everything that happened in 2008, I was warning about for many, many years before 2008. But what I expected to happen as a result of 2008, I knew that the government would double down on its failed policy. I knew the Fed would slash rates. I knew they would start printing money again, and they would try to reflate the bubbles. My feeling at the time was that they would fail in their attempts to reflate the bubbles, and instead the dollar would succumb to these mistakes, and we would have a big drop in the dollar, and that would, relapse into a worse crisis. What I got wrong is that the world actually was fooled by our monetary magic, and the Fed was able to succeed where I thought they would fail. They did reflate a bigger bubble than the one that popped in 2008. But they're not going to be able to repeat the trick again. It is impossible to reflate a bubble bigger than the one that just popped. And so this is it. It's not 3 strikes or third time's the charm for the Fed, because they did it before after the NASDAQ bubble popped. It's going to be 3 strikes and you're out if you are still in the dollar. The myth is that the U.S. economy was strong before COVID. It wasn't strong at all. It was the weakest it had ever been. It was the biggest bubble that had ever existed. That is why the economy imploded so quickly as a result of the COVID-19 lockdowns, right? Because we were so vulnerable. We had nothing saved for a rainy day. And it didn't just rain, it poured. And the air started to come out of this everything bubble in the fourth quarter of 2018.
What is the proper relationship? What should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. So long as that is in place and there is no evidence that the administration or the Congress or anybody else is requesting that we do things other than what we think is the appropriate thing, then what the relationships are don't frankly matter. And I've had very good relationships with presidents.
Well, I know that you